Most people remember the number 100. It makes sense. It's impossible. It's clean. It's almost biblical. Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points, and history stops arguing for a second. But before there was 100, there was something maybe a little stranger. 73 points and 36 rebounds in regulation. No overtime padding, no novelty ending, just 48 minutes of one man warping the entire geometry of basketball in front of a crowd of only 3,516 people in Philadelphia. What I like about this game is it's not some fake museum piece where the other side barely matters. Chicago had a real giant of its own. Walt Bellamy was a rookie, but he wasn't a project or a curiosity. He wasn't a tall guy learning how to be a center. He's already a monster. He finished his rookie year with 31 points and 19 rebounds per game, and he does win Rookie of the Year. So this isn't just Wilt bullying the helpless. This is Wilt staring across at another future Hall of Fame center and still making the night feel unfair. So the night's not really about the famous number that came later. It's about the rehearsal, the warning shot. The night the league should have understood that 100 wasn't a miracle waiting to happen. It was a deadline. Welcome back to Warrior 100. I'm documenting one game per player until I reach 100. This is Warrior 10, and our lens today is Wilt Chamberlain. January 13th, 1962. Chicago Packers, Philadelphia Warriors. The Warriors win this game 135 to 117. Wilt goes for 73 points and 36 rebounds, while Bellamy answers with 36 points and 23 boards, which on any other night would certainly be the headline. Here, it's just supporting evidence. It's the proof that even when the opponent had a center good enough to become one of the greats, Wilt could still make the whole building feel like it tilted in his direction. And that's the angle that I want tonight. Not just greatness. Distortion. What does it look like when a game becomes abnormal in real time and everyone involved understands it before the final buzzer? Philadelphia comes into this game as a contender, but not the contender. On January 13th, the Warriors were 26-19, second in the East, behind the 33-8 Boston Celtics. Chicago comes in 9-31, buried in the West, an expansion team trying to survive its first year under the Packer name. On the same night as this game, Syracuse beat Boston, Cincinnati beat Detroit, and the Lakers edged St. Louis. So the league was moving all around Philadelphia, while Wilt was staging a weather event inside Convention Hall. But the room is more interesting than the records. Chicago was bad, but they weren't dead. In the days just before this game, the Packers had beat Cincinnati twice. Then they stunned Boston 103-90 before beating Detroit 102-99 the night before coming here. That means they came into this game loose, not broken. They're still taking punches, but they had enough recent proof to think they could make somebody else uncomfortable. Bellamy in particular was already producing like a star. Philadelphia, meanwhile, was living inside Wilt's furnace. The Warriors had lost at Cincinnati 2 nights earlier, despite Wilt scoring 52. This game sat right in the middle of one of those absurd Chamberlain stretches, where 39, 47, 52, 73, 62, 62, 54, 53, 62 starts to read less like game logs and more like a typographical error repeated for a month. So the Philadelphia locker room temperature isn't calm confidence. It's acceleration. It's let's give the big man the ball again and let the game be his problem. The coaching matchup is better than it first appears. Philadelphia's coach is Frank McGuire, a Hall of Fame coach whose whole thing was structure, defense, execution, discipline, and control. He was the first coach to win 100 games at 3 different colleges. And the fun twist here is that in 1957, he'd beaten Wilt's Kansas team for the NCAA title. 5 years later, he's coaching Wilt in the pros, and that by itself gives this game a weird type of depth. McGuire once solved Wilt. Now, he was enjoying the consequences of having him. Chicago's coach is Jim Pollard. He's another Hall of Famer and one of the great early Lakers. The Kangaroo Kid, a player famous for his leaping ability and championship pedigree. So even though the Packers were a new franchise, and a losing one, This wasn't a random sideline operation. There's real basketball authority on both benches. So as far as Hall of Famers in uniform, you have Wilt Chamberlain, Paul Horizon, and Walt Bellamy right there in the game. So this isn't just one giant overshadowing a bunch of anonymous men. Philadelphia still had Horizon, who's one of the great scorers of the pre-modern NBA, and a foundational warrior. Chicago had Bellamy, an Olympic gold medalist and a future Hall of Famer, already doing historically strange rookie things. And there's one really nice connective tissue player here, Woody Salisbury. He's starting for Chicago in this game, but he'd actually been drafted by the Warriors in 1957. So if you want a shared player thread between these teams, there it is, Woody Salisbury. The rivalry itself is thin because Chicago's brand new. The Chicago Packers were in their first and only season under that name, before becoming the Zephyrs the next year. So the rivalry piece here is less emotional, more structural. Expansion team versus star machine. A rookie giant versus an established supernova. Western straggler versus Eastern contender. Still, there's a nice mini story inside of it. The Warriors already went into Chicago on December 16th and won 112-110 with Wilt scoring 50. So by the time the Packers arrived in Philadelphia for this one, they'd already seen the movie twice. They just hadn't seen the director's cut. So there's no hate here. It's just repeat exposure. Chicago already had been told what Wilt Chamberlain looked like, up close. January 13th is the sequel where the warning becomes evidence. And Wilt matters in this project because he breaks the scale. He's Philadelphia born. He's Overbrook. He's Kansas. Then he spends a year with the Harlem Globetrotters, because the NBA's eligibility rules make normal progression impossible for a player like him. Then he gets to the Warriors and instantly becomes less a star than an argument. How much can one person do in a basketball game before the sport has to admit that it's being rewritten? So by the time this game happens, Wilt is already not just dominant, he's excessive. The Hall of Fame summary on him reads like a myth inventory. Rule changes, scoring records, rebounding records, impossible durability, and all around, an all-time leading rebound total, 50-point games stacked like lumber. But what makes January 13th so important is that it sits at the hinge between Wilt is doing impossible Wilt things, and Wilt is about to do the single most famous impossible Wilt thing. This is the bridge between the legend that everybody knows and the season that made that legend mathematically possible. For Wilt personally, this game means two things. First, it's proof that his scoring wasn't just about overtime or chaos or one strange opponent. He'd scored 78 points in a triple overtime loss earlier that year. Fine. People can rationalize that, but 73 in regulation against a team with another elite center? That's a little bit harder to wave away. Secondly, it confirms the Warriors under Frank McGuire were willing to live inside the discomfort of a one-man machine. They weren't pretending the ball should be evenly shared for aesthetic reasons. They knew what they had. They kept feeding him. Wilt, to put it mildly, he didn't embarrass that strategy. Here's the simplest clean version of this game. Chicago scores 117 points and still loses by 18. That's how violent the offensive environment is. It's truly offensive. The line score goes 34-29 Philadelphia after 1, 64-58 after 2, 102-90 after 3, and then 135-117 at the horn. So it's not a one-quarter avalanche. It's a steady bend. The Warriors win every quarter. Chicago's close enough to stay in the conversation, but they're never secure enough to change the subject. Wilt scores 14 in the first quarter. That's a star quarter, but not an omen. Bellamy's active. Chicago isn't scared, and the game initially has the feel of a good high-scoring night from a great player. Philadelphia leads by 5 points. In this era, that's barely a lead at all. Then Wilt gives you 19 in the second, and the mood starts to change. By halftime, he's at 33. The game's no longer just about whether Philadelphia wins. It's about whether the scale of what's happening can keep growing without the structure collapsing. The third quarter is where the Warriors create real separation. Wilt scores 17, which is almost funny because 17 in the quarter can read like a slowdown for him. Philadelphia pushes the margin to 12 by the end of the period, 102-90. And now, Chicago's in the worst possible position against a player like this. close enough that the starters stay relevant, far enough back that the leader can keep attacking without anybody pretending the game is over. Then the fourth quarter turns the excellent into the absurd. Wilt puts up 23 in the last period alone. He finishes with 73 points, 36 rebounds, 29 field goals on 48 attempts, and 15 made free throws on 25 attempts. That line is monstrous enough by itself, but the game gets even stranger when you place Bellamy next to it. Bellamy goes 17 for 40 from the field, scores 35, and grabs 23 rebounds. So the two centers alone combined for 108 points and 59 rebounds. They also combined for 88 field goal attempts. That's not just a subplot. That's the architecture of the night. And Wilt didn't do it in isolation. Paul Arizin chipped in 26. Thomas Sherry added 11. Al Attles gave Philadelphia 12. Guy Rogers only scored 7 points, but the real number there is 16 assists. That matters to the bottom line because one lazy way to tell this story is Wilt just swallowed the whole offense. But the better way is Philadelphia had a functioning attack around him. They shot better than Chicago, they moved it better, and they got more from the foul line. Wilt was the center of gravity, but the Warriors weren't just standing around in awe. They were building him a runway. Chicago, to its credit, does enough offensively to make this feel like a real game instead of a staged ceremony. Ralph Davis has 29, Charlie Tira gives them 15, Cy Green adds 13. They finish with 49 field goals, which ain't nothing, but their efficiency breaks against Philadelphia's. The Warriors shoot better overall, rebound slightly better, assist more, and get a much larger free throw contribution. Chicago's total line says capable offense. Philadelphia's says better offense plus a natural disaster. For Philadelphia, this game is a thesis statement. The Warriors weren't going to out-Celtic the Celtics. They weren't going to become the most balanced, most orderly, and most universally admired team in the sport. Their clearest path was just let Wilt be Wilt. Let Wilt be more than the best player on the floor. He had to be the floor's defining condition. And this game proves that concept can work at a terrifying scale. Philadelphia moves to 26-19, keeps pace as an East contender, and keeps building the case that if they ever get the last 5 minutes right against the Celtics, the whole league could crack open. For Chicago, it's one of those losses that still tells the truth about the roster. The Packers were bad, but they weren't empty. Bellamy's night matters because it shows that the franchise already had a cornerstone. Expansion teams usually look like scaffolding. Chicago at least had a real building block, even if the walls around him were thin. That distinction matters. There's a difference between losing because you have nothing and losing because your best thing happens to exist in the same era as Wilt Chamberlain did. So if somebody asked me how this game could make a new basketball fan, I would say this, because it explains that basketball isn't always about perfection. Sometimes it's about volume, rhythm, pressure, stamina, and that feeling that numbers are sprinting away from common sense. This game gives you a little bit of everything. Huge stars, huge pace, a rookie giant on one side versus an all-time legend on the other. Enough scoring that the scoreboard starts to feel unstable. And then, above all of it, one performance so oversized that it pulls the whole sport into a different shape. A new fan doesn't need to know every name in the league to feel this. He just needs to hear that one team scored 117 points and somehow lost the game by 18. One center had 35 with 23 boards and still got outshouted by history. And that Wilt followed 73 points with another 62 the very next night against Boston, because apparently rest is for lesser species. Wilt's 73 was treated as the most points ever scored in a regulation NBA game. By this point in the season, Frank McGuire's running idea that Wilt was capable of reaching 100 no longer sounded like hype. It sounded overdue. The league was still reacting as though Wilt kept surprising it. But the surprise by now was really just the size of the number on a particular night. This wasn't the 100-point game. This was the night that 100 stopped feeling impossible. Philadelphia finishes the season 49-31. Wilt averages 50.4 with 27.5 rebounds for the entire season. That reads like satire. The Warriors make the playoffs, push Boston to 7 games in the Eastern Division Finals, and then lose 109 to 107 in Game 7 on Sam Jones' late jumper. So the season after this game becomes both proof of Wilt's outer limits and proof of how hard it still was to get past the Celtics machine. It's one of the great almost seasons in league history. Chicago finishes 18-62, last in the West, but even in that wreckage, Bellamy wins Rookie of the Year, and the franchise survives long enough to change its name to the Chicago Zephyrs the next season. So if you're looking for honest team outcomes, Philadelphia gets the grandeur and the heartbreak. Chicago gets a lot of losses, but also the confirmation that Bellamy's real. And for Warrior 100 purposes, there's one more piece of context I like. This was the final Philadelphia season before the franchise moved to San Francisco. So games like this aren't just Wilt chapters. They're final Philadelphia chapters. A franchise is about to move west. The city's about to lose this version of the Warriors, and one of its last great local nights is Wilt dropping 73 in the old building. Wilt's immediate future, of course, is absurd. Less than 2 months later, he scores 100 in one game. Later, he wins championships with the 1967 76ers and the 1972 Lakers. He retires with records all over the league's architecture, enters the Hall of Fame, and stays one of the few players whose statistical life still feels partly fictional, even after decades of analysis. But there's another reason this game matters inside Wilt's long life. It captures him before the public story hardens into just one thing, before the 100-point photo swallows the rest, before people flatten him into a meme or math problem. On this night, he's still a full version, Philadelphia prodigy, Kansas star, Globetrotter marvel, impossible athlete, giant scorer, and maybe the single most exhausting problem that the port ever had to solve. Or tried to. So when we talk about Wilt later, I don't want to talk about the famous number. Not only. I want to talk about the pattern, the repetition. The way 73 and 36 in regulation can somehow become a prelude instead of a peak. That's what makes him different from almost everyone else who ever played the game. Next time we leave the gym and head to the diamond for Astro 35, Bill Doran. January 11th, 1985. Different sport, different rhythm, different temperature entirely. Tonight was about scale, the game getting bent around one overwhelming force. Next time, we get something tighter, cleaner, and craftier. Baseball is pressure, positioning, and accumulated edge. Bill Doran isn't Wilt Chamberlain. Obviously, nobody is. But that's part of what makes the jump fun. From giant spectacle to infield precision. From numerical thunder to the quieter mechanics of a really smart ball player. This was Warrior 10, Wilt Chamberlain, January 13th, 1962. A game where the opponent scored 117 points and still felt incidental. A game where another future Hall of Fame center put up 35 points with 23 rebounds and still finished second by a mile. A game where Wilt didn't simply dominate. He made normal basketball logic feel too small for the room. And that's why this one matters. Not because it's more famous than the 100-point game. Because it helps you explain how the 100-point game could even exist. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.